Mortuus pater filium moriturum expectat. Marius dashed out of the barricade, Combeferre followed him. But he was too late. Gavroche was dead. Combeferre brought back the basket of cartridges. Marius bore the child. Alas! He thought, that which the father had done for his father, he was requiting to the son. Only, Thénardier had brought back his father alive. He was bringing back the child dead. When Marius re-entered the redoubt with Gavroche in his arms, his face, like the child, was inundated with blood. At the moment when he had stooped to lift Gavroche, a bullet had grazed his head. He had not noticed it. Courfeyrac untied his cravat and with it bandaged Marius' brow. They laid Gavroche on the same table with mabeuf, and spread over the two corpses the black shawl. There was enough of it for both the old man and the child. Combeferre distributed the cartridges from the basket which he had brought in. This gave each man 15 rounds to fire. Jean Valjean was still in the same place, motionless on his stone post. When Combeferre offered him his 15 cartridges, he shook his head. "Here's a rare eccentric," said Combeferre in a low voice to Enjolras. "He finds a way of not fighting in this barricade." "Which does not prevent him from defending it," responded Enjolras. "Heroism has its originals," resumed Combeferre. And Courfeyrac, who had overheard, added, "He is another sort from Father Mabeuf." One thing which must be noted is, that the fire which was battering the barricade hardly disturbed the interior. Those who have never traversed the whirlwind of this sort of war can form no idea of the singular moments of tranquility mingled with these convulsions. Men go and come, they talk, they jest, they lounge. Someone whom we know heard a combatant say to him in the midst of the grape shot, "We are here as at a bachelor breakfast." The redoubt of the Rue de la Chanvrerie, we repeat, seemed very calm within. All mutations and all phases had been, or were about to be, exhausted. The position, from critical, had become menacing, and, from menacing, was probably about to become desperate. In proportion as the situation grew gloomy, the glow of heroism empurpled the barricade more and more. Enjolras, who was grave, dominated it, in the attitude of a young Spartan sacrificing his naked sword to the sombre genius, Epidotas. Combeferre, wearing an apron, was dressing the wounds. Bossuet and Feuilly were making cartridges with the powder flask picked up by Gavroche on the dead corporal, and Bossuet said to Feuilly, "We are soon to take the diligence for another planet." Courfeyrac was disposing and arranging on some paving stones which he had reserved for himself near Enjolras. A complete arsenal, his sword cane, his gun, 2 holster pistols, and a cudgel, with the care of a young girl setting a small Dunkirk in order. Jean Valjean stared silently at the wall opposite him. An artisan was fastening Mother Hucheloup's big straw hat on his head with a string, for fear of sunstroke, as he said. The young men from the Hapgood d'Aix were chatting merrily among themselves, as though eager to speak patois for the last time. Joly, who had taken Widow Hucheloup's mirror from the wall, was examining his tongue in it. Some combatants, having discovered a few crusts of rather mouldy bread, in a drawer, were eagerly devouring them. Marius was disturbed with regard to what his father was about to say to him. Chapter 18. The vulture become prey. We must insist upon one psychological fact peculiar to barricades. Nothing which is characteristic of that surprising war of the streets should be omitted. Whatever may have been the singular inward tranquility which we have just mentioned, the barricade, for those who are inside it, remains, nonetheless, a vision. There is something of the apocalypse in civil war. All the mists of the unknown are commingled with fierce flashes, revolutions are sphinxes, and anyone who has passed through a barricade thinks he has traversed a dream. The feelings to which one is subject in these places we have pointed out in the case of Marius, and we shall see the consequences. They are both more and less than life. On emerging from a barricade, one no longer knows what one has seen there. One has been terrible, but one knows it not. One has been surrounded with conflicting ideas which had human faces. One's head has been in the light of the future. There were corpses lying prone there, and phantoms standing erect. The hours were colossal and seemed hours of eternity. One has lived in death. Shadows have passed by. What were they? One has beheld hands on which there was blood. There was a deafening horror. There was also a frightful silence. There were open mouths which shouted, and other open mouths which held their peace. One was in the midst of smoke, of night, perhaps. One fancied that one had touched the sinister ooze of unknown depths. One stares at something red on one's finger-nails. One no longer remembers anything. Let us return to the Rue de la Chanvrerie. All at once, between two discharges, the distant sound of a clock striking the hour became audible. "It is midday," said Combeferre. The 12 strokes had not finished striking when Enjolras sprang to his feet, and from the summit of the barricade hurled this thundering shout: "Carry stones up into the houses! Line the windowsills and the roofs with them! Half the men to their guns, the other half to the paving stones! There is not a minute to be lost!" A squad of sappers and miners, axe on shoulder, had just made their appearance in battle array at the end of the street. This could only be the head of a column. And of what column? The attacking column, evidently. The sappers charged with the demolition of the barricade must always precede the soldiers who are to scale it. They were, evidently, on the brink of that moment which M. Clermont-Tonnerre, in 1822, called the tug of war. Enjolras' order was executed with the correct haste which is peculiar to ships and barricades, the only two scenes of combat where escape is impossible. In less than a minute, 2/3 of the stones which Enjolras had piled up at the door of Corinth had been carried up to the first floor and the attic. And before a second minute had elapsed, these stones, artistically set one upon the other, walled up the sash window on the first floor and the windows in the roof to half their height. A few loopholes carefully planned by Feuilly, the principal architect, allowed of the passage of the gun barrels. This armament of the windows could be effected all the more easily since the firing of grapeshot had ceased. The two cannons were now discharging ball against the center of the barrier in order to make a hole there, and, if possible, a breach for the assault. When the stones destined to the final defense were in place, Enjolras had the bottles which he had set under the table where Mabeuf lay, carried to the first floor. "Who is to drink that?" Bossuet asked him. "They," replied Enjolras. Then they barricaded the window below, and held in readiness the iron crossbars which served to secure the door of the wine shop at night. The fortress was complete. The barricade was the rampart, the wine shop was the dungeon. With the stones which remained they stopped up the outlet. As the defenders of a barricade are always obliged to be sparing of their ammunition. And as the assailants know this, the assailants combine their arrangements with a sort of irritating leisure, expose themselves to fire prematurely, though in appearance more than in reality, and take their ease. The preparations for attack are always made with a certain methodical deliberation. After which, the lightning strikes. This deliberation permitted Enjolras to take a review of everything and to perfect everything. He felt that, since such men were to die, their death ought to be a masterpiece. He said to Marius, "We are the two leaders. I will give the last orders inside. Do you remain outside and observe." Marius posted himself on the lookout upon the crest of the barricade. Enjolras had the door of the kitchen, which was the ambulance, as the reader will remember, nailed up. "No splashing of the wounded," he said. He issued his final orders in the tap-room in a curt, but profoundly tranquil tone. Feuilly listened and replied in the name of all. "On the first floor, hold your axes in readiness to cut the staircase." "Have you them?" "Yes," said Feuilly. "How many?" "2 axes and a pole-axe." "That is good. There are now 26 combatants of us on foot." "How many guns are there?" 34. 8 too many. Keep those 8 guns loaded like the rest and at hand. Swords and pistols in your belts. 20 men to the barricade. 6 ambushed in the attic windows, and at the window on the first floor to fire on the assailants through the loopholes in the stones. Let not a single worker remain inactive here. Presently, when the drum beats the assault, let the 20 below stairs rush to the barricade. The first to arrive will have the best places. These arrangements made, he turned to Gavroche and said, I am not forgetting you. And, laying a pistol on the table, he added, the last man to leave this room will smash the skull of this spy. Here? Inquired a voice. No, let us not mix their corpses with our own. The little barricade of the Mondétour lane can be scaled. It is only 4 feet high. The man is well penny-wound. He shall be taken thither and put to death. There was someone who was more impassive at that moment than Enjolras, it was Gavroche. Here Jean Valjean made his appearance. He had been lost among the group of insurgents. He stepped forth and said to Enjolras, you are the commander? Yes. You thanked me a while ago. In the name of the Republic. The barricade has 2 saviors, Marius Pontmercy and yourself. Do you think that I deserve a recompense? Certainly. Well, I request one. What is it? That I may blow that man's brains out. Gavroche raised his head, saw Jean Valjean, made an almost imperceptible movement, and said, that is just. As for Enjolras, he had begun to reload his rifle. He cut his eyes about him. No objections. And he turned to Jean Valjean. Take the spy. Jean Valjean did, in fact, take possession of Gavroche, by seating himself on the end of the table. He seized the pistol, and a faint click announced that he had cocked it. Almost at the same moment, a blast of trumpets became audible. Take care! Shouted Marius from the top of the barricade. Gavroche began to laugh with that noiseless laugh which was peculiar to him, and gazing intently at the insurgents, he said to them, you are in no better case than I am. All out! Shouted Enjolras. The insurgents poured out tumultuously, and, as they went, received in the back, may we be permitted the expression, this sally of Gavroche's. We shall meet again shortly.